The clerk has advised me that we have a quorum and that the meeting is ready to begin. The witnesses have sound check, so I will call the meeting to order. And I welcome you all, including new members that are sitting in on the committee, to this 25th meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting, as you are aware, is taking place in a hybrid format according to rules adopted on November 25th. I would expect all members attending in person to follow the pandemic protocols that are in place. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to make a few comments before we begin. Today's meeting is available in both official languages. To get interpretation, if you're appearing virtually, simply go to the bottom of your screen and click on the interpretation icon. And I would ask each member that is presenting to speak slowly so the translators can properly interpret your saying. And if any member of the committee loses interpretation, please notify me by using the raised hand icon if you're appearing virtually, or by raising your hand if you're in the house. I would also ask that during the meeting all comments be addressed through me, the chair. As you are aware, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February the 3rd, the committee will resume its study of the Housing Accelerator Fund. I would like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussions with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions. As an individual, we have Edward Goldstein, Steve Pomeroy, Consultant and Executive Director, Canadian Housing Evidence Collaborative, McMaster University, Smart Property Institute, Mike Moffat, Senior Director. I will now begin by asking Mr. Goldstein to present his opening comments for 5 minutes. I will time you, and as you're I'll give you a 10-second notice to conclude your comments. So, Mr. Goldstein, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Edward Goldstein. I'm the president of Redwood Corporation, a family-owned business that develops land and builds subdivisions, plazas, and purpose-built rentals. In trying to prepare my presentation to this committee, I reviewed the comments of some of the other presenters and some of the questions that followed. One of the questions was in regards to a statement from CIBC that questioned the ability of the construction industry to be able to respond to the increased demand for housing and the resulting supply shortage. I believe that the question should have been about the ability of municipal governments to respond to this shortage by providing approvals in a timely and efficient manner and to address the resulting lack of supply. I understand that there are currently shortages of labor and materials, but construction cannot occur until approvals have been obtained. My experience is that approvals are rare and require an inordinate amount of time to achieve. For instance, one of our developments was waiting for comments from the Heritage Group at a municipality who sat with it for 18 months before they decided they had no comments. The site plan approval process was unable to continue during this time. This seems to be occurring on a regular basis these days with many municipal departments. There is an obvious shortage of purpose-built rentals in many of the large urban areas in Canada. My company had to rezone a site across from a regional shopping mall. It was a 4.8-acre site with 700,000 square feet of residential building area for rental housing and 3 20-story towers, and it only attracted 50 people to the public meeting, all of whom were only interested in when it was going to be built and when they could get a unit. That was 5 years ago. Currently, the application is still being reviewed by staff and the project cannot begin construction. This is for a project where there were no objections from the public or any ratepayer groups, and the demand for these units have been demonstrated. Costs have risen dramatically during this time. In addition, the municipalities are inconsistent with their use of lot levies to generate income from developments. Some municipalities understand that the way in which they assess levies allows them to influence the areas and types of developments developers propose. They understand that by paying levies on behalf of projects they wish to encourage, they achieve a payback in terms of the ability to obtain property taxes quicker than they would otherwise. This results in a quick return of their investment. This kind of forward thinking should be used more often and by more municipalities. Some municipalities and regions charge different levy rates for units in multi-residential buildings based on their square footage. Developers are therefore discouraged from building larger family-sized dwellings, of which there is little supply. Levies in one region in the Greater Toronto Area, are expected to rise 16% for units under 700 square feet and 30% for units over 700 square feet at its next bylaw review. This seems to be counterintuitive to increasing the supply of affordable family dwelling units. I would also like to note that there is no size qualifications for levies charged on single-family detached dwelling units. The goals of the three levels of government must be aligned when money is given for large infrastructure projects. There is no point in funding rapid transit or highways when municipalities don't take full advantage of these expenditures in their planning process. Arbitrary height restrictions along subway or LRT routes should be less restrictive and allow more density. This would allow better access and more usage. It seems to me that the relationship between federal and provincial governments and developers is much more constructive than that between the developers and municipalities. This relationship seems to be adversarial in many cases. Much of the work done by the municipality is redundant and inefficient and adds excessive costs to projects. It exposes the municipality to additional liability as well. I think that the term affordability is misleading. I believe that what we are experiencing is a lack of availability of certain housing types that are required by different people. For instance, we think that affordability applies to home ownership, and so we make funding available to allow more people to purchase their own homes, such as single-family detached houses, townhomes, or condominiums. In reality, many people, such as seniors or people that no longer require their own homes, would like to get out of the responsibilities of home ownership and under a fixed income would prefer a rental property because there's no down payment required or monthly condominium fees. There is a critical shortage of this product at this time. Municipalities should be sensitive to the needs and requirements of all people. This would increase the supply of resale homes as people move to a product more suitable to them. Let's not forget that any two people making the same amount of annual income could have different ideas as to what is affordable or not based on the lifestyle decisions that they make. Any program that tries to define units as being affordable runs the risk of supplying units to persons for whom it was not intended. In summary, I believe that the committee should address the standardization of procedures with which municipalities examine development applications and the use of deadlines to speed up the process, the relationship between infrastructure spending and how the municipalities utilize it, re-examination of procedures used to set levies and the uses for which they are required. In addition, consideration should be given to the fact that existing rental stock is aging and much of it was built with dated technology that doesn't meet our current carbon use and safety technology. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Now to Mr. Pomeroy. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Is the mic working okay? Yeah. Yes. Thank you for having me here today. I'm a long-time housing policy consultant and also affiliated with research centres both at McMaster University and Carleton, and I've spent about 40 years studying sort of housing issues, particularly housing affordability issues. In response to a call for ideas from CMHC back in January, I did submit a detailed brief discussing the issues of housing supply, how the relationship between housing supply and affordability, and the recent escalation in home prices and rents, and some suggestions on how to structure the proposed accelerator fund. And I've shared that with the committee, and I think it's in translation, and you'll get it in a week or so, I think. I'd like to take one step back, though, from this question of how to actually use the fund to ask a more fundamental question. Do we actually need it? Do we need to spend $4 billion on an issue that's been defined as supply, and I'm not convinced that the issue that's causing home prices and rents to go up is primarily caused by supply issues. I think it's caused more by issues on the demand side of the market, and therefore we may actually have, if we've diagnosed the problem incorrectly, spending money to fix the problem isn't going to actually solve the problem. I think there's a lack of evidence that suggests that the corollary, if we have a lack of supply, will increasing supply actually fix the affordability or the issue of excessive rents and excessive home prices? The evidence I would present in the brief suggests that wouldn't actually be the case. In terms of the argument that we have under supply, certainly if we look over the last 20 years, we've actually had a fairly robust supply response. For every 1,000 people we increase our population by, we've been building 540 homes on average. That's 1.85 people per home compared to a national average of 2.4. So we've actually built enough to meet that. We did have a surge in population growth in 2017, 2020, just before the COVID crisis, which did cause some pressures on the housing market. However, most of that increase in population at that point in time was from non-permanent residents, temporary foreign workers, and particularly international students, which would have had more effect on the rental market and rents than it would have had on home prices in causing that particular problem. I think what's caused the double-digit increase in prices we've seen over the COVID period in 2 years has much more to do with the demand side, particularly the access to cheap financing, which was increased significantly with the decline in mortgage interest rates. And more particularly, as house prices have gone up, 3/4 of the people buying a home are existing homeowners. And if the value of their equity just doubled, their ability to bid when they go out and purchase a new home is significantly enhanced. And this concept of supercharged demand enabled by this bagfuls of equity and windfall gains from sleeping in their beds at night, along with low interest rates, is really a much more significant factor in pushing up home prices and to some extent rents than is the lack of supply. So if the issue is the cause of increases is more on the demand side, will an initiative that actually increases supply solve the problem of excessively high home prices? If we look at housing starts last year, we saw a peak level, up 33% over the average of the last 10 years to 271,000 units nationally. So the industry has responded, municipalities have responded. I think the issue now is how do we sustain that level of supply as opposed to have to double supply as was proposed in the budget. The kind of supply that we're seeing, though, the average price or the median price of new homes completed in 2020-21 was up 40%. So we significantly increased supply by 33%, prices went up by 40%. In the rental market, in the last 5 years, we have seen a very significant increase in rental supply, which we saw very little of for about 15 or 20 years prior to 2016. But along with that, the average rent of rental units completed since 2016 nationally is 45% higher than the average market rent. Here in Ottawa, it's 65 to 70% higher than the average market rent. So we're producing new supply, but we're not addressing the fundamental issue of is that supply affordable to lower and middle income renters and to enable young households to access the home ownership market. So I think my first suggestion to the committee would be to actually define the problem correctly and see if this is the right kind of response. If indeed we do want to go forward with the Accelerator Fund, then I think it has to be very surgically targeted to specifically address the affordability issue. Basically incenting municipalities, rewarding municipalities for increasing supply of family-oriented, ground-oriented homes below certain price criteria would be an effective way to do that. We had a similar initiative in 1975 under the Federal Housing Assistance Program, and it provided municipal incentive grants to municipalities to do just those types of things. So I think the issue here is really about defining the problem correctly. If we want to address affordability, let's be very precise about that and design the programs to actually come up with ideas that specifically address affordability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pomeroy. Now to Mr. Moffat for 5 minutes. Mr. Moffat, you have the floor.
Well, thank you for having me here today. My name is Mike Moffat. I'm the Senior Director of the Smart Prosperity Institute, a clean economy think tank housed at the University of Ottawa. Now, over the past 5 years, home prices have doubled in Halifax and Kitchener-Waterloo and on Vancouver Island. They're up a whopping 164% in my hometown of London, Ontario. Yet, despite that, they have not risen at all in Regina. They're up marginally in St. John's, Newfoundland, and are up less than 40% in Winnipeg and Quebec City, just a little bit above inflation. So, why are home prices skyrocketing in some parts of Canada, but not others? And the answer is simple. In regions where housing completions cannot or are not allowed to keep up with population growth, we have skyrocketing prices. Southern Ontario is one such region. Before 2016, Ontario's population grew by roughly 120,000 persons per year every year, and house price growth outside the Greater Toronto Area was relatively modest. The oil price crash of 2014-15 and the liberalization of federal policies governing international students caused an overnight population boom in Ontario, centered around Toronto, and population growth rates nearly doubled overnight, as we detail in the report 1 Million Ontarians. In response to this population boom, Ontario changed almost nothing. Municipal planners all but ignored increased population growth. The 2017 revision to the Provincial Growth Plan ignored the issue entirely, using population growth estimates that were several years out of date, which we detail in our report, Forecast for Failure. High population growth and low housing completions lead to housing shortages, skyrocketing prices, and an exodus from the Toronto region. In the year before the pandemic, 60,000 people on net moved out of the city of Toronto and 28 to 32. So it was young families that were priced out of the Toronto region and were forced to drive until they qualified to other parts of southern Ontario. This exodus caused Toronto's population of children under the age of 5 to drop to levels not seen since the 1970s. Because of the restrictions on building child-friendly, climate-friendly homes in our cities, those young families were often ending up in small-town Ontario, where family-friendly housing was allowed to be built. In our report, The Growth of London Outside of London, we show that historically roughly 20% of housing completions in the London, Ontario area were outside of the City of London. Over the last decade, that figure has steadily risen to 41%. Well, there are many benefits to small town living, and while those homes may be child friendly, they're not particularly climate friendly. Families are being pushed into neighborhoods that are not walkable and will never have access to public transit. This sprawl leads to increased infrastructure costs and strains big city municipal finances. Those families will visit London to shop, to work, and to learn using local infrastructure, but they will not pay municipal taxes to the City of London. With increased immigration targets and rising numbers of climate refugees and refugees from Ukraine, Ontario's population growth will remain strong, creating a further need for family-friendly housing. Regions that cannot build that housing should expect to see population outflow and labor shortages, leading to slow economic growth. The federal government and all 4 major Ontario provincial parties have been committed to setting a target for 1.5 million net new housing units in Ontario over the next decade, a doubling of housing starts from the previous decade. We believe at SPI that this is an appropriate target. However, we caution against the thinking that a unit is a unit is a unit. Ontario has been able to increase the construction of small, high-rise apartment units in our major cities and single detached homes in our exurbs and small towns. What is missing is child-friendly, climate-friendly housing within our cities. Whether through the housing accelerator or other policy levers, the federal government should ensure that they are not just incenting more of the same, but instead ensure that their housing policies are compatible with their economic and climate goals. I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Moffat. We'll now open the floor to questions from committee members, beginning with Madame Kusi for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I'm finding this study incredibly frustrating because I'm hearing clearly about so many of the problems, and yet it seems to me, in addition to the current federal solutions that we have not solving the problems, it seems that the problems upon which the federal programs are built on are originated in municipalities, from which a large part of the current coalition government comes from. So I guess I'm very confused about really what the solutions will be. Respectfully, Mr. Pomeroy, it seems to me, even if I have three people who own a house and they buy another house, the rent will be less for someone looking for an option for three houses rather than one house. So I do believe if it was just one house that was built rather than three. So I do believe it is still a supply issue. And then when I go on to the testimony of Mr. Moffat, and I'm wondering, Mr. Moffat, what the shirts are in the background there, and if you just allow me after I finish this line of thinking to explain that, I would be interested in hearing that as well. But what I'm hearing you say is that you're seeing the current government programs pushing Canadians out of major centres into smaller centers, and yet at the same time I feel I'm hearing you say the government needs to do more of the same bad programming to keep these individuals, or keep the individuals in the centers, because that's really what I'm hearing you say. I was with you till about 3/4 of your testimony. I guess Mr. Goldstein, your testimony is the one that's resonating with me the most, even though apparently you're not our witness. And I will say I do like your name. That is the name of my son, Edward. So that's a great name. But, when I evaluate what has gone wrong in my city of Calgary, and it's certainly not to the same extent as the examples as provided by Mr. Moffat in the GTA, for example, or he gave other examples of the Vancouver Island. But in my evaluation of it, it's three things which you touched upon, Mr. Goldstein, and that is approvals by municipal governments, that there is like one person to do retaining walls, for example, and so you are waiting for endlessly for an approval. Secondly, the land supply. I think that, again, in a coalition mentality, there is the hesitancy to release land, which is just not realistic. And then finally, the levies, whereby municipalities think, if we stick it to the developers, then that will solve our problems, when really what the developers do is pass it on to the consumers rather than working collaboratively and intelligently with municipalities in an effort to not only economize those costs in the greatest possible capacity, but sort of intelligently collaborate in an effort to avoid passing on those costs. So, Mr. Goldstein, I'm hoping you'll be able to address further my comments around supply and those three things that I mentioned, the approvals, the land supply, and the levies. And as well, I agree with your comment around affordable housing. I think this is a term which is continuously used disingenuously, where people think, I'm a young couple, I want affordable housing, when really it's initiatives for a smaller segment of the population, for which the rest of the population is going to somehow have to pay for or subsidize. So your comments, please, Mr. Goldstein. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I could go on for hours about specific examples where I feel that the supply of developable land is being held up and is not being able to proceed to the construction phase because the bureaucracy in the municipalities doesn't want to process those plans, and they're not doing it in a timely fashion. I believe that's creating the supply issue. I think there's always a demand for housing, and the demand is going to get better because we're actually going to be losing supply due to the fact that existing supply deteriorates. And people are ignoring that fact. Again, in the municipalities, there seems to be a really disconnect between federal federal objectives and provincial objectives and municipal objectives, which are created by political, I guess, NIMBYism would be the way to put it, but it could be it could be perceived by municipalities to be, they could be more constructive in solving that problem than they are. I mean, everybody stands to gain by by supplying housing to all levels of society and making the communities work better within.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Madame Kuzi, your time is up. Now to Mr. Collins for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses for their attendance today and the information that they're going to provide. First, I'll start with Mr. Pomeroy. Welcome, sir. I want to start with building new can be quite expensive, and so we've had certain witnesses come in to talk about retrofits and buying existing stock. It's cheaper. Renovations can happen quicker than new builds. And the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust was in front of us recommending an acquisition stream. And it's really along the same theme that you adopted earlier in terms of a targeted approach. So, Mr. Chair, if you remember at the last meeting I talked about, it's not just about creating supply, it's about creating affordable supply. And so can I ask you your comments as it relates to an acquisition stream and how that might help with either retaining affordable units that are in competition with the private sector or up for grabs for REITs and others, and how that might assist with a targeted approach to assist with our goal and objective of providing affordable housing.
Yes, I'd be happy to speak to that. I mean, I think Mr. Goldstein mentioned the issue about the existing stock when we're losing it. We haven't seen the data yet from 2021, but from 2011 to 2016, in this country, we lost 322,000 units renting below $750 a month. So 60,000 units a year of very affordable existing housing, most of which was in the private sector. It didn't entirely disappear. Some of it was demolished for redevelopment as a result of intensification policies, but most of it, the rents simply just went to a higher rent level, and it was less affordable to the folks living in there. That process, which is generally referred to as financialization, as various capital funds, and I think REITs have been sort of targeted in this, but it's not just REITs, it's a variety of investors, including individuals buying 3-4 unit properties, are seeing opportunities because of high rent pressures and opportunities to increase the rents, to simply increase the rents. And as a consequence, that stock moves out of it. And then we try to build new affordable housing for low-income people at $400,000 a unit. So the idea of the acquisition fund is to enable nonprofits to emulate the behavior of REITs, and essentially a non-profit REIT, and go and acquire some of these existing older, 60s, 70s generation, relatively affordable market rental properties that are renting at close to the average market rent, and with a small amount of equity assistance and some financing through the federal government by repurposing, for example, the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, they could actually acquire those, and because they're non-profit, would tend to preserve the lower rents rather than push them up market.
That's great. Thanks for that answer. Along the same lines, in terms of a targeted approach for affordable housing, almost a third of Canadian households live in inadequate or unaffordable or unsuitable dwellings, and 1/10 are in core housing need. Can you advise as to how we can assist those that are renters in this category with the Accelerator Fund?
The issue you're focusing on there is, housing need has those three categories. Is the unit big enough? Is it suitable? Is it in good enough condition? And is it affordable? 92% of those folks in core housing need have only an affordability problem. They're living in a house that's adequate and suitable. Mm-hmm. So actually taking the Canada Housing Benefit, for example, and expanding it and increasing the level of assistance to more households, all those folks, they're paying too much of their limited income for rent. Giving them some help with the rent, we don't need to build them new housing. We can actually help them where they currently are. So I think we haven't traditionally in this country utilized sort of those types of demand-side subsidies. The Canada Housing Benefit edges into that, but I think it's grossly underfunded relative to the level of need. We need about $4 billion a year rather than $4 billion over 10 years to really address housing affordability issues for existing renters, leaving aside any building.
Thanks, Steve. Mr. Chairman, if I could switch gears now to Mr. Moffat. One of the unintended consequences of pushing density is that we see less family-friendly units constructed. And I know that as past president of City Housing Hamilton, We had families on our affordable housing wait list that wait anywhere between 5 and 7 years for an affordable housing unit. And so I would like to know from Mr. Moffat, how can the Accelerator Fund help support families that are in need of an affordable housing unit?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think the first thing we need to look at is all the disincentives in the system to building the larger units. I agree with Mr. Goldstein that a lot of the tax and development charge that we have at a municipal level incentivize the building of many smaller units rather than family size units. So I think it's important when spending this $4 billion in creating incentives for municipalities to make sure that we're incenting the type of behavior that we want. And I think one of the ways we can do that is by ensuring that municipalities are not putting their thumb on the scale and giving certain advantages to building, again, very small units rather than 2 and 3 bedroom units that meet core housing needs as defined by as described by Mr. Pomeroy.
Thank you for that. Subsequent question would be, Mr. Chairman, through you. The Accelerator Fund was advertised and marketed through the election and subsequent to that time to help municipalities with some of the issues that have already been noted today and with other witnesses. What role do you see the private sector and not-for-profits playing in cooperation with municipalities as it relates to utilizing those resources through partnerships? And that's to Mr. Moffat.
Oh, yeah, I certainly think there is a role. There are, for the lower end of the population, you're never, it's just going to be too expensive to assume that they play in the market rate space. But that said, I think a lot of the barriers to doing that are regulatory barriers that hit both both market rate housing and subsidized housing. Frances Beulah at the Globe and Mail has a number of pieces where she talks about the issues of building affordable housing in Vancouver, and the Vancouver's municipal government is getting caught up in some of their own rules. So I think we need to address those barriers that are preventing the entire spectrum of housing being built. So when we look at more nimble regulatory processes, we have to realize that we're doing that not just to help the market side, but also to accelerate the
Mr. Moffat,
building of
we've gone over.
houses.
You can catch up at another question. Madame Chabot, vous...
Madame Chabot, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses. These are important questions, but they're also complex questions. For those of you who are watching, I think that, seriously, in most cities in Canada, at least in Quebec, it's a hot topic. We were talking about it. They were talking about it on the news. The vacancy rate is at the lowest it's been. Prices are continuing to rise. Units do not meet people's needs. They're not family friendly. We're struggling with this supply and demand question. This is the constant rationale. If we increase the supply, we'll reduce the costs. This way of thinking doesn't quite, there was an increase in supply and the prices continue to rise. If we want to use the new fund, $4 billion over 5 years, this is not money that's being spent immediately. There's a new fund that has not defined affordable. How can this fund truly meet needs? What are the conditions for success? How do we meet people's needs? I think we need to continue increasing supply of social and community housing. We need to define affordability, and we have to set a percentage of the money that will be dedicated to truly affordable housing. What do you think, Mr. Pomeroy?
I think there are two elements here. One is this definition of affordability, and as the member from Calgary mentioned, it's a term it means all things to all people. We don't really know what affordability is, and the term, affordable housing really focuses more on low-income folks, and housing affordability is, can our kids afford to buy a house? So we really have those two different segments. I think for the low-income folks, I don't think that the Housing Accelerator Fund is the right answer for the very low-income people. I think what we need to basically do is increase the funding of the National Housing Strategy, which is targeted to that specific issue, addressing homelessness and addressing very low-income need. If the Accelerator Fund wants to address the second issue of housing affordability for middle-income, young kids trying to get into the housing market, moderate-income renters, then we have to sort of look at what kind of incentives we're getting to. And I think, as the other speakers might mention this as well, I mean, the issue of size, when we did this, we had a very, very similar program in 1975. And one of the things it created was the assisted rental program. It was grants with municipal incentive grants. And the grants were unit-based, and they were a specific number. What the builders built was a whole bunch of bachelor units and one-bedroom units. So if we actually do want to address the affordability in the rental market, and particularly for families who can't afford to buy, I think the Accelerator Fund does need to be quite prescriptive in saying, okay, we're going to incent and we're going to give incentives to municipalities if they approve this type of unit, certainly family type oriented type units for that particular issue. But I think it's probably inappropriate to skew the Accelerator Fund to address the deep need issues, which, as I mentioned, should be done through the National Housing Strategy.
We believe a certain percentage should be dedicated to affordable housing, and at the same time define affordable. We'll have to also think about the percentage of the market. For example, in a city like Montreal, we could say that affordable is $2,200 per month, but that makes no sense. When you think of affordable housing, it's housing that has to be maintained as affordable. It can't be affordable for just 1 year, but it has to meet the needs of the middle class that would be able to afford it. If the new fund can't do that, we'll miss our target. If the target is just to build housing without thinking about affordability, we're really missing the mark. There are other witnesses who have told us, Mr. Moffat or Mr. Pomeroy said that we should fund by project, like we saw with the Rapid Housing Initiative, which was quite effective. Do you think that this is one good way of proceeding? Because we're studying the question. There could be more than one outcome. So for certain organizations, this was a winning format. There were some imperfections. Projects needed to be submitted quickly. What do you think, Mr. Moffat?
We need to focus on tying these funds to outcomes and particular reforms. So I know on a number of parties, for instance, have talked about if cities are getting transit funding, that they be required to build to allow a certain height or allow duplexes or triplexes by right. So I think this money could be best spent by helping municipalities with regulatory reform to allow the market to build more family-friendly and climate-friendly houses, rather than paying to actually get homes built. As Mr. Pomeroy mentioned, I think that would be better. That type of approach would be better on the National Housing Strategy or other federal projects.
Mr. Moffat, now to Madame Zerillo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate this conversation around opening up a conversation around demand, because I agree that it's been largely ignored in this conversation. So I'm going to have a question for Mr. Pomeroy and potentially Mr. Moffat, just on what they're seeing as the goal of this housing affordability accelerator and what they're hearing in their circles around the interpretation or the thoughts around what the goal is. And I really appreciate the comments around tying to outcomes. Before I get into it, I just want to share on the demand side, some of the things that I've seen is that, we have created demand with low interest rates, with immigration services centralized in large urban centers, with OCP changes that encourage intensification, which in fact is creating gentrification and rent eviction, destruction of purpose-built rental, and also the short-term rental market like Airbnb. So these are all of the demand side pieces that I've seen. And I even heard today at some talk about the family-friendly and the larger. And I can tell you in my experience that we did get transit funding along the route, and the development community came back and said, yeah, we're going to take the incentives that we get for 3 bedrooms, but then they came back and asked to turn them into lock-off suites so that they could also rent out 1 or 2 of those bedrooms. Then they came back and said, we want interior bedrooms. We don't want to have to put windows on these bedrooms. And it actually drove up the price. So I'm really, really worried about this. So I want to dig into more on this demand side. So Mr. Pomeroy, I'm going to start with you on the demand side. I mean, you named a few of the ones that you feel are driving demand. So can you just say what you think we need to really focus on the demand side, and what do you think is the goal of the Housing Accelerator Fund, and what are they saying in your circles around what they think this is?
There is a great deal of ambiguity about what the Accelerator Fund is intended to do. In CMHC's consultation, they said everyone in Canada deserves to have a safe, affordable place to call home. We need to remove barriers to housing supply and want to offer options for renters to become homeowners. So it's very much around this sort of question of appealing to the middle class. Can our kids afford to buy a home? I think it's to a large extent was politically motivated. It's a good political response as opposed to a good policy response of helping young families get into home ownership. At the same time, they want to remove barriers to help municipalities build more housing more quickly in an ambitious and innovative manner. But again, here in Ottawa, we saw housing starts go up last year by 72%, or 58%, I think it was. But it was a very, very significant response. So somehow some municipalities have been able to significantly accelerate what they're doing and build more homes. But simply accelerating and expanding the supply hasn't resulted in prices. So I think there is this need to reflect on what is the objective of the Accelerator Fund? Is it to improve affordability? Is it simply to expand supply and hope that as a consequence of supply that will result in greater affordability? In basic economics, that should happen. But the problem with the housing market is that homes are fixed in location. The certain neighborhoods have very high values. I walk around Ottawa, people are knocking down existing 1960s homes, selling for $500,000 or $600,000, and building a duplex and selling each side for $1.4 million. So we're doubling the number of units, but we're doubling the price at the same time. So I think I don't think anybody has really articulated, and perhaps this committee should, is what is the objective of the Accelerator Fund, and what are we really trying to achieve, and then what outcome measures are we going to put in place to make sure we achieve it.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Moffat, you talked about that too, tying to outcomes. So I would just ask you, what are they saying in your circles, or what are your interpretation of what the Housing Accelerator Fund is? And then also just that question around demand. I know you mentioned the family housing. We know schools in urban centers are difficult. Even in Calgary, the school board started busing kids into the urban centers because they didn't want to spend the money to put schools out in the communities where it's where there's growth of kids.
Yeah, well, I would echo Mr. Pomeroy's sentiment that it's actually unclear to us what the Housing Accelerator should be trying to accomplish. And I think affordability should be part of that. But I also think we need to think through environmental outcomes. In Ontario, we are losing 175 acres of farmland every single day to development. Again, because as my comment said, that our current system is very good at building small high-rise apartment units and single detached homes in small towns and sort of nothing else in between. On the demand side, I think of these issues that we've had during the pandemic of low interest rates, high white collar savings rates, and so on, as an accelerant, as a fuel. Think of it like gasoline, where if you pour gasoline on a pre-existing fire, like we had in the housing market in Southern Ontario, you get a big explosion. Where if you don't have a fire, we've had very low interest rates in Saskatchewan. We've had very low rates in Edmonton and Newfoundland, and we haven't seen housing prices go up all that much. So does this money play a role? It absolutely does, but it accelerates the pre-existing trends. So absolutely, as interest rates go up, we are going to see a lot of that speculative fuel come out, but we still have these underlying housing shortages in parts of the country.
Mr. Chair, do I have any time left?
10 seconds. Not sure.
Okay, I'll pass
We'll
then.
catch up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madame Zarillo. Now to Mr. Chong. Welcome to committee, and you have 5 minutes, Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excited to be here to talk about an important issue to Canadians. Mr. Chair, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Pomeroy. He mentioned something in his opening remarks that I thought was interesting. He said that it's a demand issue and not just a supply issue. And what I've seen over the last number of years is a breakneck pace at which mortgage credit has grown over the last 2 decades. And arguably, that's one of the big reasons why housing has become unaffordable in Canada. If you look at the data, mortgage credit stood at about $400 billion in the year 2000. And I'm speaking in nominal terms now, so it's about $400 billion in the year 2000. It jumped to about $1 trillion in 2010, and then it doubled yet again to $2 trillion in 2020. And if you look at the compounded annual growth rate, it's 7.5% over that 20 years, far ahead of population growth and inflation, far ahead of nominal GDP growth. And then during the last 2 years alone, it's jumped by another $300 billion to $2 trillion. Sorry, it was $1.7 trillion in 2020 and then jumped to $2 trillion in presently. And so, arguably, if OSFI, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, if CMHC, which I know you have some experience with, and if Finance Canada had issued regulations to slow the growth in mortgage credit to something, let's say, more reasonable, in line with, let's say, population growth and inflation, let's say something around the range of 3.5% per annum, arguably we could have moderated house price increases. And just finally, before I get your comment on this, if you look at one example of what I'm talking about, in March of 2020, OSFI relaxed the rules concerning the domestic stability levels, the domestic stability barrier that's required by the big banks to have to 1%. And that decision freed up an additional $300 billion in capital that the banks could then loan out. And commensurately, mortgage credit growth jumped by some $300 billion in the last 2 short years. And so my view is that if OSFI and Finance Canada and CMHC had put in place measures to ensure that this additional $300 billion in credit didn't all get plowed into residential real estate, but perhaps into business lending and small business lending, and if other measures like that have been more broadly applied in recent years, that we might have not ended up in this affordability crisis that we're seeing now. And I'm wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, certainly. Access to credit is a critical factor in driving up. Home prices are market-driven. They're driven by what people can afford to pay. As much as the development industry would argue they're cost-based, I would argue they're market-based, and then you make sure the costs can achieve them. And I think that having the access to credit has driven that up. I did a chart. I think it's in the background paper you'll get, where the if we look at the amount of borrowing the median household could borrow over the last 20 years at the prevailing interest rate and the median income each year, that borrowing level was above the average house price. So we had people pulling that up, and therefore access to credit, mortgage credit in particular, has been a big factor. I think where OSFI and others got it wrong around the macro-prudential rules, trying to constrain access to credit to sort of take the boil off the market, particularly after 2008, 2009, was that the stress tests really impact first-time buyers more than they impact the buyers who have existing equity and they don't need as much mortgage, and they got all their accumulated equity. They're the ones that are driving the prices up, not the first-time buyers. The first-time buyers are being closed out of the market. So I think we need to figure out a way to enable young kids to get into the market, because what will happen, if you can't get into home ownership, you stay in the rental market. If you stay in the rental market, vacancy rates are going down, rents are going up, and the bottom end of the rental market is where things get hurt. So trying to think about housing as a system and how what we do on the home ownership side affects the rental side is critically important. I know this is not directly answering your question, but I mean, it is related to this, is that, again, it's thinking about which parts of the housing system do we want to help, and I'd say helping young buyers get into the market has an indirect benefit on the rental market and can be very valuable, and the policies that we've pursued over the last 20 years, or 10 years, 2015 to about now, have very much done the opposite and precluded them out of there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chong. Mr. Pomeroy. Now to Mr. Van Bynen for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Coteau. My questions will be directed to Mr. Goldstein, so I only have 2.5 minutes, so I'll try and get to them as quickly as I can. We've heard the dilemma in which some of the incentives are now encouraging developers to build studios and single-room units, and that it does not respond to family needs. In your opinion, Mr. Goldstein, how can the government avoid the trap if the incentives that it offers does not direct the developers to build family units? How can we incentivize family units as opposed to the smaller units? Let me just summarize that.
Well, I think the biggest problem is the levy situation. How would you say? It prevents you from building large units. In the past 6 years, I've built 600 units. At least 75% of them were 2 and 3 bedroom units over 700 square feet, like closer to 900 and 1,000 square feet. And they were always the fastest ones to go. The 1 bedroom units, there's such a large supply of 1 bedroom units through condominiums in the GTA, and that nobody wants them as much as they want 2 and 3 bedrooms. There's nothing for families, and I don't know that the fund has really much effect in this type of product. It's just the availability. I think the supply is the biggest issue. And one of the other witnesses said that Mr. Pomeroy, I think it was, he said about the supply would help renters and therefore home buyers, but it would also help home buyers by taking some of the older people that presently live in homes out of that market and put them into the rental market. They really have nowhere to go if they don't want a house anymore.
I hate to interrupt you, but at my 2-minute mark. So
okay.
A quick question would be, could the fund subsidize the difference in development charges between the smaller units and the larger units? I'm looking at some really effective and quickly implemented incentives. Would something like that work?
Well, my question is, why does a municipality have to load up development charges in a multi-residential rental building when there's very little cost to the municipality of having that building in the municipality? All it does is produce property taxes for them, and it doesn't require them to provide road repair. It doesn't require them to do sidewalk, snow removal. Doesn't require them to do garbage removal. It could be a profit center if they looked at it the right way. To me, they're not looking at it right. That's the main thing. To throw money at it isn't really the what should be done. The municipality should recognize that their income will
Let me apologize, please, Ed. I'm at 3 minutes and 21 seconds, and I'm shortchanging my colleague.
Sorry about that.
Well, thank you so much. My question's to Mr. Moffat. Mr. Moffat, you said that there was a disconnect between the type of supply being built and the type that's actually needed, and you talked a bit about climate-friendly and family-oriented supply. Can you maybe just share some of the reasons why you think municipalities are not building this type of these types of units, and also how could the Accelerator Fund, which by the way has a goal of building 100,000 units over the next few years, how it can be used to actually accomplish this goal, Mr. Moffat?
Yeah, well, certainly levy issues, as Mr. Goldstein says, a lot of it is zoning. I could tear down my house here in Ottawa tomorrow and build a McMansion, but if I want to build a triplex and house 3 families, I would be facing years of red tapes. So how the accelerator can help is to provide incentives to say, okay, if we are going to provide municipalities with a certain amount of funds to improve, speed up approvals processes and things like that, here are the particular zoning and regulatory changes we would need to tie to that funding. So I think it's a carrots and sticks approach where the accelerator fund could be used to incentivize the kinds of regulatory and zoning changes and parking minimum changes that we need in our communities to allow for more family-friendly density.
Am I done?
Your time is up.
Thank you so much, Mike.
And with that concludes the first group of witnesses. Yes, I believe, Mr. Moffat, there was some, the committee members are inquisitive about the uniform behind you.
So a lifetime ago, I was head coach of Canada's national dodgeball team, and yes, we do have one, and we won gold back in 2013 and 2014. I would like to say to Ms. Kuzi as well, I think my comments may have been misinterpreted. I am certainly not advocating more of the same from the federal government. I would like to see changes. So, just to throw that out there.
Thank you. Thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today. We will suspend while we prepare for the second grouping of witnesses. So again, thank you, Mr. Goldstein, Mr. Moffat, and Mr. Pomeroy, who is appearing in person. We'll suspend for a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the committee study on the Housing Accelerator Fund. And before I welcome the witnesses that are appearing virtually, I'd like to advise you that you can choose to participate in the language of your choice. You can do that by clicking on the interpretation service icon on your surface. As well, if there is a loss of translation, please signal me by using the raised hand icon, and we will suspend while it's clarified. As well as those members of the room, if there is an interpretation loss, please raise your hand and let me know. I would also ask the witnesses to speak slowly for the benefit of the interpreters, so that we have no issue with translation. I would like to welcome the following witnesses: Brian Roseborough, Executive Director of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario; Amber Crawford, Senior Executive; Michael Braithwaite, Chief Executive Officer, Blue Door Sports Services. Welcome back, Michael. Again, we had problems the last time. And Mr. Seth Asimakos, General Manager and Founder of Kaleidoscope. We will begin with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario for 5 minutes, whichever witness is going to provide the opening remarks. You now have 5 minutes, and I will indicate 10 seconds as you're approaching your timeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Roseborough.
Thanks very much. And thank you for the opportunity to appear today before the committee. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Roseborough, the Executive Director of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. And as the Chair mentioned, I'm joined today by my colleague, Amber Crawford, who's a Senior Advisor at AMO. AMO is the collective voice of the 44 municipal governments in Ontario, and housing affordability is really one of the greatest challenges facing our province and indeed our country. AMO has worked on this issue for many years with both the provincial and federal governments. It's a truly complex issue and not one that municipal governments can solve on their own. In fact, the demand levers and supply actions are mostly held by others. Ultimately, we believe that solutions must involve a variety of actions from all orders of government and the development industry. Earlier this year, AMO released a policy paper with nearly 90 recommendations for various stakeholders that need to be involved. The document, titled A Blueprint for Action, an integrated approach to address the Ontario housing crisis, can be found on our website. Local leaders in Ontario are already rolling up their sleeves to do their part to improve housing options for people. The measures and investments in the federal budget 2022 include, of course, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and those are most welcome. The fund has great potential to help get housing built faster through direct and flexible investments that allow municipalities to tackle the most serious local barriers to supply. Increasing supply is crucial, but it is important to ensure that the Housing Accelerator Fund enables the right kind of supply. Like FCM, which has also appeared before this committee, AMO believes that the right supply means affordable options, both market and non-market, aligned with the shared federal, provincial, municipal vision of low carbon intensification and transit-oriented development. The right supply also means focusing on local supply gaps unique to each local market. Excuse me. However, we would also say that new supply is not the only solution. There is also work to be done to preserve existing housing stock that is affordable, especially purpose-built rental housing. In our blueprint, AMO supported the call by FCM for the federal government to provide acquisition funding and/or grants for the nonprofit and cooperative sectors to purchase existing multi-residential buildings and keep them affordable for low-income tenants. Our main purpose today, with the time we have remaining, is to provide input on the Housing Accelerator Fund's program design. All municipalities can benefit from these investments. Flexibility is key to customize local solutions. The Housing Accelerator Fund must also account for the needs of smaller rural and northern communities. So ultimately, we would like to see a broad list of eligible activities that can be funded. Some examples we would highlight include activities such as establishing digital e-permitting, improving the development approvals process, such as instituting Lean Sigma methodologies, increasing human resource capacity for municipal planning and approval processes, the adoption of new systems where feasible and desirable, such as the community planning permit system and/or community improvement plan, conducting data analysis of local housing market needs, studying market conditions that are required prior to enacting inclusionary zoning or for transit-oriented housing developments, purchasing land for affordable housing development, addressing NIMBYism through public awareness campaigns, consulting about Indigenous peoples' housing needs within municipal boundaries, and the collection and dissemination of best practices. Our point is that there are many things that would help on the ground with different local circumstances. We also have advice about the implementation considerations that include giving priority to projects that increase affordable housing supply both in the private market and the not-for-profit and cooperative housing sectors, making the Housing Accelerator Fund stackable with other federal programs such as the National Co-Investment Fund, and consider formula-based allocations rather than application-based funding as much as feasible. Lastly, we understand the committee is open to advice about the Federal Lands Initiative. This is important given the high cost of land in the development process in many locations in the country. AMO supports the government working with FCM to redesign and expand the Federal Lands Initiative by providing surplus land, underused Crown lands to municipal governments. This should be contingent on building affordable or missing middle housing solutions. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you for listening and thank you for your consideration. And Amber and I would be very pleased to answer questions when time permits.
Thank you, Mr. Roseborough. Now to Mr. Braithwaite for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be back. So my name is Michael Braithwaite. I'm the CEO of Blue Door, an organization up in York Region that's been serving our community for about 40 years. For the first 35 of those years, we were primarily focused on emergency housing. And over the last 5, although we still are the largest provider of emergency housing in York Region, we have switched to providing some secondary housing, so transitional housing, and housing for specific groups like to us LGBTQ plus youth, who there was a need and we filled that need through some housing in the community. We have kind of switched our thinking. We've gone to more innovative thinking. We've leveraged private donor funds to create sustainable, affordable rental housing for seniors, families, and youth. We repurposed a vacant Parks Canada home. They have 44 of them in Rouge Valley Urban Park. We took one of those homes that was empty and in bad shape and turned it into a duplex, which will provide affordable housing for 30 years for 2 families. With the funds from Reaching Home, we were able to buy a 4-plex in Newmarket and work with partners to create long-term, affordable, truly affordable housing for Indigenous men, for women fleeing violence, for families at Blue Door, and for single men and women looking for affordable housing. So we applaud, and the entire sector applauds, the implementation of the Housing Accelerator Fund and would make the following recommendations moving forward. 1, invest and encourage community land trusts across the country. Purchasing land for land trusts and providing incentives for municipalities or developers to donate houses or property to the land trust can create truly affordable housing for years to come in many communities. And we're in the process of doing that now, expanding an existing land trust from Toronto into York Region with the help of the mayor of Newmarket as well to create that land trust with funds from CMHC. Provide funds to nonprofits or charities with a focus on housing and homelessness to purchase existing rental housing. You saw Mr. Pomeroy just presented to the group, and you know that stat that for every purpose-built rental, we're losing 15 to the private sector, right? So we need to get these into the hands of nonprofits and charities like Blue Door. Recently, a 9-plex in Aurora was up for sale, and it had very, very affordable rents, way below market, with a fear that this is going to go to the private sector where rent evictions will take place, and we'll lose that to the sector because the funds weren't there to do that. Number three, investment programs like Blue Doors Construct, a social enterprise that not only can help build the goal of hundreds of thousands of homes, but will prevent homelessness by providing a living wage and a meaningful work to youth, new Canadians, and others across the country in the trades. Currently, there's over a dozen of these social enterprises operating across the country with opportunity to create more moving forward. Lastly, providing municipalities with the supports they need to create new zoning bylaws that might speed up the development of buildings and properties owned by faith communities willing to step up to create new affordable housing in this crisis. So right now, in York region, there's all sorts of faith communities with land and a willingness to do so, but some of the zoning pieces are a little bit of a barrier getting in the way, so that could help create new housing quickly. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your hard work and passion on this fund. We look forward to seeing it in action and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great wave. Now to Mr. Asimakos for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity. I am the general manager and the co-founder for Kaleidoscope Social Impact. We were named the St. John Community Loan Fund. We're a 22-year old organization, and we do three things. We do social finance, so we enable other developers to develop affordable housing and mixed-use commercial and affordable housing. We also invest in social enterprises and micro enterprises. And our second service line is training, impact training, financial literacy, enterprise development training, and youth entrepreneurship. And our third vertical is our own real estate development. So we have developed both commercial, built new, and we've also renovated 3 buildings and are currently at the last stage of design and financing for a 12-unit plus commercial supportive housing project. On the social finance side, we've got 3 or 4 projects in the pipeline across New Brunswick that are building affordable housing units, probably about 50 altogether. So that's who we are as an organization. And our aim is to grow the fund to 10 million and hopefully to 20 and 30 million. We probably need about 100 million in the fund just to leverage the amount of the builds that we do need in New Brunswick, to tell you the truth. As context, New Brunswick's values, property values have doubled and tripled in some cases. We've got 7,000 individuals on a waiting list for affordable housing in New Brunswick. Maybe a year and a half ago when we did that study, there were 5,000. So it's shot up incredibly as a result, partially as a result of COVID and people looking to the Maritimes to live now. And it's had a huge impact. We visibly see many more people on the streets as housing's push people from this level down to the next level and then to the street. If we look at the waiting list alone, and at 200,000 a door, we'd need 1.4 billion right there. So the amount of money that's needed and that's being advocated is still very limited, to put it in context. And I guess I'll start with piggybacking on what's been said already. One is to enable the maintenance of existing affordability. It's been said a few times, and we were at a housing conference last week. It was an 8-to-1 ratio that I heard. I didn't hear 15-to-1 as far as losing affordability to building new units. But that's our biggest problem right now. So we have to find a way to purchase in the nonprofit sector to maintain the existing supply, let alone build new stuff. So I think that has to be a priority. There has to be a way to use that money to bridge the gap between what's being asked for on a price level and make it affordable for nonprofits to purchase and maintain affordability. As far as CMHA is concerned, since it's the main vehicle to get money out, it has to speed up the process. We're looking at 6 to 12 months for projects to get through a review, get to a letter of intent, and finally get to an agreement and flow into capital. That's way too friggin' slow. I mean, if you go to a bank, it's not going to take that long. We've got to be able to speed that up. If you want to actually speed up the amount of affordable housing out there, we've got to speed that process up. And if that means you need more people, then hire more people in CMHC to review. The other option, similar to the social finance fund that they're going to be rolling out here shortly, is in which they're taking a chunk of money and getting it out to intermediaries. That's another option. We are an intermediary, and we move considerably more quickly than CMHC in getting behind projects.
Thank you,
So,
Will. Thank you. That
Okay.
concludes our time limit. Now to
Thank you.
Mr. Ruff for 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair, and my thanks to the witnesses for all coming today and providing some crucial testimony here. It's fascinating. Sometimes the testimony's contradictory depending on the panel, but I think that's important. It just highlights how complicated our country is and how diverse our country is, and it's sort of what I want to hit at. Obviously, from being an Ontario MP, being a couple hours north of the epicenter of Toronto, and no digs at my colleagues that are from the more populated areas, but being a rural MP, the pandemic's really exacerbated movement into more rural communities. It's driven up house price. Been one of the key factors as people have moved out of the bigger cities. For example, the average price in my rural community of Bruce Grey Owen Sound has now topped over $760,000, an increase of over 23% just in the first 3 months of 2021. And you get down into some of the other types of properties, single family homes, a little bit lower at just over 600,000, but up 28% year over year. Townhouse or row units are almost 500,000, an increase of 40%, and apartments are 386,000, a 46% increase. And the lack of supply in my area is the lowest it's ever been in 3 decades, with 388 residential units available for sale just a few months ago, at the end of March. So my point is this is just to highlight some of the challenges that we're having, and the things that I'm hearing from not-for-profits, social housing developers, and others is that for the not-for-profits, rezoning costs with the municipalities, i.e. they've got the land, they've purchased it, but it's costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars to rezone, just getting access to the loans, the approval timelines, the access for both developing and just normal housing, the regulations, etc. So I guess my first question to the Association of Municipalities for Ontario is just two sort of questions, because based on your testimony there, you're talking about the use of the Housing Accelerator Fund for everything from purchasing to resources, hiring, digitization, etc. I guess it's fair to say you want the program to be as flexible as possible. And then my second question to you would be, from a rural versus urban percentage, of what kind of access or percentage breakdown of the Housing Accelerator Fund do you think?
I'll begin, and Amber may have some additional comments as well. I'll start with your second question, which is a rural-urban divide, and we certainly don't have a recommendation in terms of what that allocation needs to look like. But to be sure, this is an impact for rural, remote, and northern communities as well. And as the member said, the impact of COVID and remote working and people leaving large areas and going into greater areas of the province has had a massive impact really throughout the province of Ontario. And that is a market that we've seen escalate in some cases by 60% over the last couple of years. So it'll be important for this fund to be of service in those communities as well. On the second part, municipalities are, I think, eager to accelerate approvals where possible. But there are many barriers in that situation as well, whether it's NIMBYism, whether it's a lack of planners available, whether it is work around planning and provincial regulation, whether in some cases it's not municipalities, but the sister organizations like conservation authorities and Ministry of Transportation and Ontario government ministries that are causing some of those delays as well. So I'll ask Amber if she has some supplementary comments there, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And I would add that one of the housing principles that we've put forward in our blueprint is the fact that to your point on flexibility, it's very critical that provincial and federal governments ensure that they have the sufficient flexibility to achieve their own housing affordability in ways that meet their own local needs rather than sort of one size fits all solutions. So I'd add that.
No, thank you for that. I guess my next question could go to maybe all three witnesses. But it's just to sort of maybe build upon what the previous witness, Mr. Pomeroy, was speaking about, and we've heard it from other witnesses as well, is this whole idea about social housing or affordable housing versus housing affordability and how that ties into the rental market as well. So I'm just sort of, interested again, not hard, fast percentages, maybe that's the wrong way to break down, but the importance that some of this access, Mr. Pomeroy was sort of suggesting maybe this isn't the right fund to be directing at social housing or affordable housing, but more just on the housing affordability. Could we get comments? We'll start with Mr. Brathwaite.
Thank you so much. I agree with what Mr. Pomeroy is saying. This may not be the right fund for that. We do know that for people who need deeply affordable housing and people experiencing homelessness, the private market right now of rental supply is not cutting it. So we need to get more supply into the hands of social housing developers and nonprofits, so it stays truly affordable, kind of rent geared to income for a long time into the future. So I would just add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. Now to Mr. Long for 5 minutes. 6 minutes. Mr. Long? You're on mute. Mr.
Sorry
Long?
about that.
There.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. And good afternoon, Seth Asimakis. It's a pleasure that you're on the panel. Seth is from my riding of St. John Rossley. So it's wonderful you're here. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Seth, for your leadership and the work you do in our city, especially with the Social Enterprise Hub and Kaleidoscope. It's transformational for the region, so keep doing what you're doing. But obviously, you're here today to talk about housing, and I'm here to talk to you, and we're here to talk to you to get, obviously your feedback on what we can do. Before I start with my question, I take your point on CMHC. We need to be better. We need to be more reactive, and 12 months to 16 months to 18 months is too long. I agree. I want to talk to you about land acquisition for people like you, and how the Housing Accelerator Fund could help. And we certainly know that securing funding at times for land acquisition to build affordable housing it's a challenge. So do you think, and I know, we've come up with this, the Housing Accelerator Fund, $4 billion, but do you think this is something that could help address that challenge for acquisition through the Housing Accelerator Fund?
Certainly, land acquisition, property acquisition is the first step in order to get anything triggered in a development. So the land prices here, of course, like we built the social enterprise hub on land. The lots were maybe $10,000 to $15,000 a piece.
Right.
So we paid like $5,000 or 60,000 maybe. Well, I spent 60,000 on one lot. The other, a month ago. So that's where things are at. So the starting point is so different right now. To me, land acquisition is important. I like what Michael was saying about land trust. So that's one way to enable property acquisition, the maintenance of affordability of land. Is to put stuff into land trust, and the land bank, which is an innovation here as well that we've started, and I'm on the board of, and there's a unique relationship with, I guess, CMHC that can fund some of the acquisition that the land bank will be making over the next decade or so. So I think. Anytime you can get involved with land acquisition so that we diminish the cost of the starting point is really, really important for sure.
Okay, thanks for that, Seth. And Chair, I'm going to share the balance of my time with MP Collins.
Thanks, Member Long, and thanks, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the AMO reps, there's obviously a common theme today and with past witnesses around the whole issue of property acquisition and land. And so I know that as part of AMO's submission to the province, and I read some of your documents that you have online, you specifically wrote to protect lower market housing from renoviction and conversion through an acquisition program that empowers community land trust, nonprofits, cooperatives, municipal agencies to acquire and preserve existing low rent market housing at risk of being bought by investment companies. And so there's a whole lot wrapped into that statement there. And I guess following up on both what Mr. Long had asked and Mr. Ruff, I know that you have a very healthy rural community as part of the AMO membership. And I know that on our side of the table, our government, our rural members are looking for land, and I know that's one of their top priorities in a recent discussion that we had at Rural Caucus. And so, can I ask through you to the AMO reps, Mr. Chairman, your comment that you've written to the province and obviously to the federal government emphasizes land. Is that something that fits well for your rural members as well, not just urban?
I'll let Amber take that one.
Yes, and thank you for the question. The short answer is yes, absolutely, and that was one of the recommendations in terms of to the federal government about improving outcomes for people. I think that the more that we can empower and provide flexibility for not only land trusts but also the provision of Crown land as well, which I know is particularly of interest to rural members. I think the more options that we have on the table, I think our local communities will be able to assess the best way, and that's exactly why we've put that in as one of our recommendations on the blueprint, not only to the federal government but also the province as well.
Follow-up question there in terms of infrastructure. That's always a challenge for rural communities in terms of water and sewer and other infrastructure requirements that are required in order to build a residential development, irrespective of its size. And so have you made recommendations regarding the same as it relates to providing infrastructure to accommodate, it's all well and good to buy or purchase a piece of land, but if you can't service it, you can't have people living there at any point in time. So can you comment on that very briefly with the couple seconds we have left?
Sure. We have made a recommendation about the numerous provincial directives, including the provincial policy statement, Greenbelt, but also regional growth plans to deal with addressing that issue that you bring up. It's a very good one and is one of the barriers that rural communities have mentioned to us. So certainly part of the solution. Complex issue, though.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford and Mr. Collins. Madame Chabot, pour 6.
Merci. Bonjour à vous. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimonies. My question is for the Association of Ontarian Municipalities. The first is on the initiative for federal lands. How could the federal government improve this initiative? And would it be advantageous for municipalities to get more land through this initiative?
I can start. And the issue, I think, is you raise is a good one. I mean, it's talking about redesigning and expanding the federal lands initiative to provide surplus or underused crown lands to municipal governments contingent on building affordable or missing middle housing options. That's certainly something that is consistent with what the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has offered. And so, Brian, if you want to jump in as well.
No, I think that's great, Amber. Thank you.
Toujours avec vous.
Still with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Sorry, I said union at first. That's how we call it in Quebec. But it's the association for you. I assume you have the same mission. In your statement, you talked about a more flexible service offer that would combine the private sector and not-for-profit and other partners. You talked also about affordable housing. There are definitions of affordable housing. Statistics Canada has one. They say that a household that has core housing needs whose housing is considered inadequate or too small, or whose income is insufficient to pay for housing. Apparently, 1.7 million households would be in this situation according to the 2016 census. So do you think that the new housing fund will remediate this situation? And if not, how can it?
Well, I'll begin and ask Amber to chime in, but I don't think the fund is going to solve the problem, but it's certainly can make very, very important contributions to it. We see the role of the not-for-profit sector and the cooperative housing sector as being absolutely essential to affordability, but you also raise an interesting point, which is looking at questions of housing affordability without looking at incomes is really one side of the story. And so we also have work to do in terms of affordability, in terms of incomes of Canadians who are looking to get into the housing market, either the rental or the purchasing market. So this program needs to fit into a much broader context that includes some of those initiatives as well.
I'll just add, if I could, quickly about the need for a rental housing strategy. It's certainly part of it. I know that we've spoken about supply, but previous presenters have done a great job at sort of suggesting that it is two sides of the same coin, and so demand we also need to look at and make sure that that everyone in our complete community, there's a mix of tenures, mixes, types, etc.
Do I still have time, Mr. Chair? This question goes to all three groups. Should the new fund prioritize building new affordable housing? So the question is for the three groups. I think that two of the groups would say yes, and that they would make affordable housing more permanent and not just to offer it and respond to demand. So whoever wants to answer. In the 2 minutes I have left, you have the choice. Mr. Chair will tell you when you're done.
Well, I'll simply add that affordable housing must be part of the equation, and the extent to which this fund can assist with deep affordability is something that should be seriously considered. I'll tell you, in Ontario, municipalities are keenly incented to increase the amount of affordable housing available, because when housing becomes unaffordable, as our other witnesses will tell you, that results in increased homelessness. And in the province of Ontario, at least, that's a municipal responsibility. And so municipalities are concerned about housing at all ends of the market, and one affects the other. And as I said, they're motivated to help address this problem. And I think this fund can be extremely helpful to municipalities of all sizes as we look at how to do that.
15 seconds. Who's taking it?
I could just say, I mean, in New Brunswick, the municipalities don't really have an impact on, in St. John, for instance, doesn't have an impact on housing so much. So that's one thing. But I think there has to be a discussion on a bigger scale of equity caps on how much property can actually appreciate in value. It's not, housing shouldn't be a commodity, and it's not, shouldn't be a quick way to get rich. And that's what's happening right now. And the rural area, all through the province, it's happening. So we can talk about rent caps, but really an equity cap is the only way that we're going to prevent this just continuing. So that's a huge discussion. This is not the place that's going to solve it, that's for sure.
Thank you.
But
Madame Zerillo?
We could set a new motion to discuss this.
Thank you, Madame Shabat. Madame Zerillo, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and I think I would be supportive of Madame Shabat's motion. I wanted to thank the witnesses today. What incredible testimony, and so important. I'm going to want to revisit the CMHC, and I'm going to start by just reiterating the goals or the aims. The aim to remove barriers and help municipalities build housing more quickly in an ambitious and innovative manner. And Mr. Asimakis, you mentioned CMHC, and I've heard this before. I'd like to hear your experience. I know that I've had experience where a project has waited 12 or 18 months to hear back if they will have a partnership, and meanwhile, nothing can happen at the municipal level. So I'm going to ask that to Mr. Asimakis if he could share other barriers, including what's happening at CMHC and any other. And I'm just going to take a moment to just mention, I've heard the word NIMBYism a couple of times today. And before you speak, Mr. Asimakis, I have to make the statement around that's an argument. That isn't an argument. And I'm sure there's many in this room that will agree, but mayor and councils have the freedom to vote for rezonings at any point in time. It's only a lack of courage that they continue to hide behind this NIMBYism. So I just want folks to know that I don't buy into the argument on NIMBYism, because the NIMBYs don't have the gavel. Mr. Asimakis, if you could just tell me what your experiences are with CMHC and what barriers you're
I'll
running
just address what you just finished with there for a second. I think it's really important for municipalities to have a very strong urban plan or rural, what have you, that talks about revitalization and the mixed development that's needed in neighborhoods. And in St. John, it does. So, and that only happens when council actually goes in that direction. And we have a very strong council that's in favor of mixed uses and so on. So, the experience with CMHC is on two fronts. One is our own projects that go through. I just looked at our application that went in, and then the timelines on everything was itemized in the return email, and it was crazy. I mean, 14 days to review just this little application, then another 30 days, and then another 60 days, and then another 60 days. So when you add that up, what is that? That's like almost 6 months to know whether you're going to have money flowing or not. Meanwhile, if I go to the credit union and I say, here's our plan, and it's got financials and everything in it, they can turn something around within 3 weeks. So to me, I don't know what that issue is, why it takes that long. And I know for ourselves as well as financing developments, if it comes to us really well put together, and we work with existing developers, it shouldn't take that long. It just shouldn't. So that's my experience. And in financing others, we've seen organizations go into the process And because it's such a volatile market on the supply chain, on pricing, on everything, quotes are limited to, at the building store, for supplies, it's limited to 7 days now. As far as contractors, it's getting to be under 30 days. So when something takes so long, then you have to go back and get more quotes, and these are quotes that are not, they're quantity surveys at a high level, a level quantity of surveys that don't get turned around that quickly, and there's an expense to that. So to me, something has to be done there. So those are my experiences. I'd just like to mention a couple other things that I wasn't able to before is with forgivable loans, there's a lock on equity. And so in a nonprofit, you are locked out of leveraging that equity with for other financing for up to 20 years. And to me, if you're a housing developer in the social or in the nonprofit sector, your whole purpose is actually to develop housing. So why put a lock on that? I just don't understand that. I think that should be taken off. That would free up a lot more equity to leverage, financing leverage. The other is subsidies on renos. Social development here, which basically flows the money through the province from the feds. They did increase their subsidy on new builds, but the subsidy on renos did not increase. So that has to change, because we've got, when you're talking about maintaining existing, well, it's about renos. And I think it's $24,000 a unit. Well, that's nothing right now. Right.
Yeah. And, I think that's another question, another motion that we should put forward to look at that. If I have a minute, Mr. Braithwaite, you talked about innovation. Thank you for those examples. Amazing. It's part of this half. They're asking for innovation. I wanted to talk to you specifically about, your experiences with CMHC and also around persons with disabilities, universal design. What kind of innovation are you seeing there to get these units built and homes built for persons with disabilities?
Well, I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is partnerships, right? So when you say innovation, it's groups like my organization, Blue Door, working with groups like Community Living in New York Region to make sure we're serving and we're listening to those lived experts, people with lived experience about what the needs are, especially when it comes to people living with disabilities, right? To design those. So when we work with them and we're looking at the purchase or design of new properties, they're telling us what their lived experience is. We're able to work with them and then work with the architects to make sure not only are we meeting the standards of accessibility, but we're actually meeting the needs of the people that are going to be living in those units moving forward. With CMHC, you know what, listen, I want to say...
your time is up. Thank you, Madame Zerillo. We'll now...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And could I ask if Mr. Braithwaite would mind doing a written submission just on the experiences with CMHC and some other barriers in financing? Thank you.
Yes. Would you submit anything you may have, Mr. Braithwaite, in writing to the committee chair? Thank you. We'll now move to Mr. Lightford for 5 and then Mr. Van Bynen for 5. And that will conclude because I do need some time for committee business. Mr. Lightford, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the guests, not only today, but throughout this study that we're doing on housing. But I can't help but sit here and listen that if this were a weekly television show, it would be called The Blame Game. Most of our witnesses have been from Central Canada. I happen to represent a riding in Calgary, Alberta. But I think many of the things I've heard from many of the witnesses have been the same kinds of things that I hear about in Alberta. Municipalities are blamed for delays by developers. Municipalities then turn around and blame the province and say that it's not us holding things up. It's various departments of government. And I guess when we tie all of that into the fact that we have a federal government that for 6 or 7 years now has been spending a lot of money, talking a lot about how much money they've been spending on housing, but we have had really no concrete evidence of what has been accomplished. It's one thing to say how much money you spend. It's another thing to talk about results. And we really have seen no results that are verified results. Ministers are picking numbers out of the air but don't have any backup as to where those numbers come from. So I guess I'm a little bit where Mr. Pomeroy was in the first session today. The first question we should be asking ourselves is this accelerator fund even required? Because it seems to me like our issue is not necessarily more money. It's a question of not being able to get through all of the various rules and regulations to actually have the money at the end of the day get to where it needs to get to. So I guess I would just throw the question out there and say that I really like the idea of Mr. Pomeroy, which says we should be studying whether this fund is even required or not, and what are some of the other things we could be doing to get rid of the problems that seem to be pretty prevalent in this industry, literally across the country. So I throw that out to any one of the guests and ask them to comment on it.
I'll comment. As far as the municipality goes, I think our municipality is doing what it can within the framework that it has. When the money comes down from the feds into the provincial government, they make decisions. So there's an opportunity to use some levers there. But I would never say that there's less money needed to create affordable housing in this country. Definitely. I do think that that the process has to speed up. Definitely. And to me, that would, they talk about a rapid housing initiative, but we're not, why don't we make the current process rapid? That would be ideal.
Yeah, and I happen to agree with you, sir. And I think the question I would have is that are we getting bang for our buck? At the end of the day, let's remember this is taxpayers' dollars we're talking about here. And if various rules and regulations and process slowdowns is eating up a large percentage of the money that's going out the door, I think that's what we have to look at first, rather than pushing more money out the door.
I'll just add, if I may, I mean, what we're talking about is a very complex array of arrangements in terms of housing from coast to coast to coast, with a lot of players, some in the public interest, some in the private interest. We've had a major shift in the market relating to the fact that people now see housing as an investment instrument rather than a place to live. We've had low interest rates that have artificially inflated the housing market. And we've had some rent controls in the past that have had positive and negative impacts. So we have a real crisis on our hands. And I think we're looking at all of the tools that may be available to help address it. And certainly some of those are systemic questions around provincial regulation and municipal actions. But anything that the federal government can do to help will be welcome. The Rapid Housing Initiative is an example of a very, very effective municipal or a federal program that saved lives in this province during COVID. And I think we have an opportunity here with this fund to put together an array of supports that help deepen affordability, help protect existing rental stock, help municipalities to do a better job of fulfilling their responsibility in the public interest, perhaps even spend some money helping the public understand why intensification is good, why provincial regulations are helpful, and why it is that we need complete communities and that there are complex discussions around that. But nobody wants to reduce the supply of housing. Everybody wants it increased for different reasons. Not everybody wants the price of housing to go down.
Thank you, Mr. Rosebarrow. Time has gone over. Thank you, Mr. Leipert. Now to Mr. Van Bynen to finish for 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for providing us the benefit of their insights. I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Braithwaite. You've talked about a couple of your projects, and my concern about any investment that the federal government do, or for that matter, any level of government, is sustainability. So you've had a couple of projects, and I'm wondering if you could share with us some examples of what the debt to equity would be so that it's sustainable at deep affordability, and how much equity would be needed in a unit. Michael?
Thank you so much for the question. I'm going to talk about our Parks Canada. I mentioned that there's 44 vacant homes, and when we talk about sustainability over time, we were able through various government programs to raise the capital to take one of those vacant homes. Parks Canada didn't have the capital to do so. Not only did we invest the money in the home to create a duplex for two families, and I think there were 2 3-bedroom homes, and because we do, it's like paying your rent in advance. So now we've created 30 years of affordable housing. So there's no debt on that. We can operate it. It's sustainable. It's easy. There's not a lot of operational costs attached to that. The other piece to that, the people that did the work on the home is a construction social enterprise. So you're actually preventing youth from falling into homelessness because they're doing the work there. So they're launching the trades where they make a living wage and have meaningful work. So there's 43 more of those homes sitting vacant with land available, things like that. It is tough though, when you talk about the debt ratio piece. We're looking at, we have a small house at a big piece of land in Newmarket. We want to work with Habitat for Humanity to do a mixed income, or I'm sorry, a mixed kind of rental and ownership model. But through the current programs offered at CMHC, it's really hard to get that mix to make it affordable for us as a nonprofit over the long term. Right, balancing that out. The more, of course, rent geared to income units we offer, the more unaffordable it becomes. You want to put some market in there, but to truly make all those units below market rent or rent geared to income, we need a heck of a lot more support than some of the CMHC programs are providing at this moment. But it takes innovation, different partnerships.
I have 2 other questions that I'd like to direct towards AMO. The first one is we heard some testimony from a municipal officer a couple of weeks ago. They said there should be no changes, and that the efficiency of the housing development process is as good as it gets. Has AMO at any time undertaken an end-for-end study that would talk about what we need to do, for example, initiate changes to the building code, or should we be funding additional staff for processing, or should we fund an end-to-end process review to streamline the development process? So has there been any studies that this committee could have a look at that points to the efficiency of the development process, the time consumed in the development process, or any types of studies that have reduced the amount of things that are required and that could expedite the process? Is there a study that AMO could provide us with?
So short answer is back in a few years ago, we did a streamlining the development process document that I'm more than happy to share. So that started the conversation. It also includes some case studies of some municipalities that have done some great work in terms of streamlining. And I won't list them, but there's probably about 4 or 5 of them in that document that also sort of illustrates exactly what you're speaking about. Continuous improvement is something that AMO has definitely looked at. We work with some different staff organizations, from planners to building officials. We've certainly been on files such as building code, harmonization, et cetera. So we take a holistic approach.
Hate to interrupt you. I understand the philosophy.
Okay.
So the next question is disbursement of funds. And I'm aware that AMO was managing the gas tax on a population base. And so there's the suggestion that the funding should go directly to municipalities, either through FCM or AMO, or be on a population basis, as opposed to a project basis. What are your suggestions?
Well, that requires the wisdom of Solomon, and we don't have a recommendation for a particular allocation formula, but we do want to suggest that it's important that this be available to all types of municipalities, including northern and rural and large urban, and not be limited to one type. And I think we've seen some progress on that. You're right, we do deliver the Canada Community Building Fund on behalf of the Government of Canada. We do that effectively. That's on a per capita basis as it's distributed nationally. This is a little more complex. I think we need to understand what the outcomes of the program are to know for sure how it should be allocated. But we are certainly prepared to engage in further discussions around that as the work of the committee proceeds.
Thank you, Mr. Rosebohr. The time is gone well over. Mr. Van Bynen, I will suspend for a few minutes while the witness leave, and we do need a few minutes for a committee business. So I'll spend for a moment while the witnesses leave. Members, the committee is back in. We will have time constraints.
Hello, Chair.
Sure. All right. Yeah, so as I was saying, like we were going to have the 3 meetings, and I thought moving it down to 2 was going to be something that we were going to do was a reasonable option. So I just, I think 2 is the reasonable compromise between 1 and 3. So I don't know why we can't have the compromise. And as I said, if I had the option, I would actually prefer to take probably 4 meetings, 1 for each part of the sections. No, I don't think that's unreasonable. Unreasonable at all to expect that. As I said, these are all very important parts of the budget. And again, like I said, I don't buy the idea that finance has this, and so as a result, we just sort of just say, oh, this is not a big deal. Like they wouldn't have referred it to us if they didn't want us to do a thorough examination of it. And really, when we're thinking about 4 hours out of the next week, I think that, again, it's a good compromise between the 6 hours we were looking at originally, and then the 2 hours, which have been proposed. And it's for me, Mr. Chair, it's just like it's the principle of it. We made a decision last week that, or I should say on Monday, that we all committed to 3 meetings, and the ministers. I'm not surprised the ministers aren't here. There were too many outs, and they were taken. And then now this additional out is being taken even to 1 meeting. I'm not sure if the government thought that only 1 meeting was going to be available or no meetings were going to be available, but lo and behold, they had space for 2 meetings, and I think as a result of that, we are seeing this occurring. So it's the principle of it. Like I feel as though we voted on those motions in good faith. We passed those motions in good faith, and then now we have the government backed by the NDP, it would seem. Usually this is what non-speaking from the committee member usually indicates, that they're in support of the government position, which is understandable considering the agreement that the 2 parties made. And it's usually my expectation, very honestly. It's just disingenuous, and it's unfortunate because, as I said, I think that 2 meetings really is just acceptable alternative to the 3 meetings that I had originally suggested. And and we're getting into this late time of the parliamentary season where we're just having to sort of go through all of these processes, which really are just like a delay or push through sort of democracy being shut down, not having the opportunity to speak, not having an opportunity to examine all of the information, which I think is very disappointing and is certainly not what our colleagues or not our constituents expect of us. And so it's just disappointing that we're sort of at this point, and I don't know why we just can't have two meetings. So it's an important opportunity to have the witnesses that we put forward show up to this committee and give their testimony. We put witnesses forward. In fact, I'm not sure. And the Bloc put witnesses forward. Did you not, Louise? I believe the Bloc put witnesses forward. And so then it's very interesting that the NDP did not put witnesses forward. I'm not sure if they didn't recognize they had to do that, or if they also thought perhaps there wouldn't be any meetings this week or next week. But that's simply not the case as we're seeing. And as well, I was even thinking about sincerely about the clause by clause, which I understand now we no longer have to do. But I was even kind of just sort of mentally preparing for it, because I know when we went through C3, I wasn't really given the courtesy of being able to read sort of line by line to truly understand it. Again, I think something like my constituents expect of me, and as well, I thought it was just disappointing and ungracious not to allow the opportunity to do that. But so once again, sort of in the way we see patterns emerging in this committee, as we see them across the House, of what the behavior we can expect from different groups and different individuals. I was also preparing for the clause by clause to really have a good understanding of that, since I wouldn't expect that we would have the time or I would get the consideration to read every single word. And as well, I know that Ms. Zarillo last time was subbed in by Mr. Bullareese, and when I saw him in the House this week, I thought, yep, that's probably going to happen again. It's probably going to be Mr. Bullareese as the Labour critic who steps in to the role again for the review, especially since there is the part pertinent about the Labour Code that we will see him here again, and understandably so, right? It takes time to familiarize yourself with these processes, as I've come to learn in my 5 years here, and I must say I'm really only getting the hang of it after all of this time. I know my colleague here, Mr. Lobb, has much more experience in reviewing these bills and that, and I just would like to take a moment and congratulate him on the passing of his bill yesterday, and a time where certainly the opposition parties did work together in an effort to provide good legislation and thorough review for Canadians, but that definitely was something that I was expecting in the clause by clause. But as for the witnesses, as I mentioned, I did think that, we could potentially have one meeting on each of the sections, and those sections again are 26, 27, 29, and 32. Witnesses on each part of them, because each part definitely has a significant is significant within the budget. Like the Employment Insurance Act, I went to the Employment Insurance consultation presentation. I was the only parliamentarian there, other than your parliamentary secretary, Irek, who I really like. He's a really nice guy. And I was very impressed by the comprehensiveness of the presentation that was made. And so, I think even sort of that information that we saw there would be relevant to this. But my more important point is that this is the kind of information that we could expect to see.
Point of order, Mr. President.
And
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yeah.
Just in terms of resources, I just want to make sure that we do have time with the resources of the right now. How long do we have interpreters for?
We will lose shortly.
We will lose them shortly?
Is that 6:30 shortly?
I am waiting for confirmation. We are checking. There was 2 other committees who were scheduled to sit this evening. I think there's discussions between the whip over where the service will be allocated. I'm waiting for a response, but at this point in time, it's uncertain.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're talking this out in a good manner and not wasting everybody, especially interpreters' time, which is very precious.
May I continue?
You certainly can.
Thank you. Yes. So, as I was saying, that was an incredible comprehensive review. Now, my 2 critiques were, if I can share them here, even though they will not go into the testimony of the review of this bill. But, the first one was that there was no timeline despite the comprehensive evaluation of the EI consultation. And then the second part was that there was no idea as to how the EI benefit would fit into the entire suite of benefits that the Canadian government provides. But again, I think that this is something that Canadians would be interested in. The benefits related to employment, I mean, this part, it's particularly ironic for this committee because this was part of the C3 discussion. And again, I think a reason why Mr. Boularice, or Monsieur Boularice, I guess we should say, was brought into this discussion was specifically around the negotiation of benefit, or sick days there, but benefits, I think, in particular. So, I just think that again, I can imagine all sorts of witnesses that would have been so important to have here to talk about these types of benefits, the use of the benefits, and as well. I mean, I guess the irony too is I think these topics would be specifically relevant, and again, Madame Louise recognizes this, I think, coming from the labor union background, and so I'm a little bit surprised that this isn't more important to the NDP on this committee. And then another thing, again, coming back to the labor code, that's section 29. I mean, I really think of the NDP historically as the party of labor, and just the fact that they potentially would not want to study this amendment to the labor code as outlined in C19. And with the budget, it seems to me that...
Madame Kuzi, we have a point of order.
I have a point of order. I want to make sure that my colleague understands that if we don't arrive at a decision, we'll have to cancel another committee somewhere else because we're using up House resources. I think my colleague understands that we agree with the position. If she wants to continue to talk about it, I want her to know that she is going to be taking away resources from another committee. I've been saying it for quite some time now.
Okay, pour avoir deux réunions.
So we can have 2 meetings?
Your motion.
Yes.
You will. Okay, Chair, have you recognized that her motion is withdrawn?
Madame Kuzi, you will have to concede the floor and give it to Madame Ferrata to formally do that.
Okay, sure, I'll do that.
It's okay. So you concluded your comments. Madame Ferrata, you are the next in line to speak.
Mr. Chair, I would like to withdraw the motion that was presented earlier in this meeting. And I agree with the consensus of having 2 meetings next week.
On the 2 dates that are currently given to us by the resources, which is Tuesday and Thursday. Do I get a consensus, Madame Shabbat? Madame Kuzi? Yes.
I will host a virtual mimosa party.
Well, we don't need that. We just need the 2 meetings.
It's from
Yes.
that. Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so clerk, but I do not see Madame Zarillo.
Sorry, what are you asking me, Mr. Chair? If I'm on side with the taking? Yeah, sorry, I don't know what you're asking me.
Madame Ferretta is withdrawing her motion and will agree to the 2 meetings scheduled for next week. And I'm told the interpreters are leaving in a few minutes. This meeting will end at that time. Do I get to see a consensus on holding the 2 meetings next week? And we'll allocate
yes, thank you, Mr.
the
Chair.
witnesses. Okay. So based on that, clerk, meeting adjourned.